Signore e signori, buonasera. Good evening. Welcome to Casa, Italiana, zerilli-marimò, New York University.
For this evening that is special and different for many reasons that you will discover with us as we get along. As you know, for the past 25 years, New York has celebrated and observed the Day of Memory, Giorno della Memoria in Italiano, International Holocaust Remembrance Day, according to the definition of the UN. And as you know, or probably you have found out if you come to our programs, for these past 26 years, 25 years, the major Italian institutions, cultural institutions in New York have gathered way in advance of the end of January to decide what programs to propose to our audiences. So the Calandra Institute, Casa Italiana, the Italian Academy, la Scuola d'Italia Marconi, the Consulate, the Italian Cultural Institute. It's only for the Day of Memory that we get together, all of us, the director of these centers, and we decide, first of all, if there is a direction, if there is a theme that we want to propose to the attention of the people that is comprehensive, or if we want to propose different events. At this we discuss what we have in mind, we talk about it, and then we come up with a calendar. Of course, the Centro Primo Levi has always played a crucial role in helping us not only with the coordination but also with the conceptualization of what kind of memory we wanted to celebrate and pursue. So this year, while we were in the phase of deciding what to do, the crucial question was, what are we going to do for these 25 years? And we said, we're going to take a pause. But a pause that is not of silence, but a pause that is of reflection about what we did and how we did it in these past 25 years. And believe me, it's not the desire of being autoreferential to talk about ourselves, but it's simply taking a moment to decide or discuss or evaluate what memory really is, what memory are we talking about here, and what is the purpose of that memory that we celebrate. And with the recent events, you can imagine how compelling these questions have become. But how important it is also to answer these questions aside from the specific historical moment in which we live. This evening, you will hear very familiar faces, you will see very familiar faces, and probably you will hear things that you have already heard from us. But we thought it was important to pause for a minute and to really reconstruct how we and other people have celebrated this memory. We'll try to answer the question, what are we going to tell about the Holocaust, the persecution of Jews, political minority, racial and gender minorities, to the children of our children? What are the stories we're going to tell them? How are we going to tell them? And in which ways also, methodologically? But we have the fortune that Andrea Fiano has accepted to be our keynote speaker tonight. I'm sure all of you know Andrea. He's the editor-at-large of Global Finance. And Andrea is here also for a very personal reason. His father, Nedo Fiano, was a survivor. And in these past months, along with his brother, they are providing support and information for a cinematographic project of a film based on his father, Nedo Fiano. That gave Andrea a further element of reflection as he undertook the trip to Auschwitz with his brother on the footsteps of his father. And we are very grateful because we know that talking about these things for him is not easy. It's not something that comes easy and for anybody. And I also remember with great affection when Nedo came to New York to present his book of memories. So for all these reasons, it's a great pleasure for me to invite Andrea Fiano to the podium and to give us his keynote address. Thank you.
So good evening. Thank you, Stefano. Today I've been asked to talk about the Day of Memory, more than 25 years after the Italian Parliament decided to celebrate on January 27th, not just the liberation of Auschwitz, but to dedicate a day, quote, in memory of the Shoah, the racial laws, the persecution in Italy of Jewish citizens and soldiers and political deportees. The UN, by the way, did the same 5 years later in 2005. What we discussed today was the subject, as Stefano mentioned, of a recent and intense debate my two brothers and I had with Ruggero Gabbai. Ruggero is working on a documentary about my late father, Nedo, an Auschwitz survivor liberated in Buchenwald by the Americans in April of 1945. My father, like most Italian Jews deported, starting from Rome on October 16 of 1943, was arrested in Florence by Italians in 1945. I did not devote myself to the study of the Shoah, which is such clearly an important part of my life. And what I'm saying today is obviously just a personal opinion, the result of a lifelong internal debate. What have we done? What can be done? What should have done differently about the Day of Memory? Is there a quote-unquote fatigue? Let me say that I am, on this topic, a minimalist. Any accomplishment is better than nothing. I believe that this day makes and made the memory not just an issue of the victims and their families. And this obviously does not mean that mistakes were not and are not being made. We are fighting massive ignorance of what happened during World War II. We are experiencing a revival of denial and nostalgia for the tragic past. Xenophobia, racism, and anti-Semitism are back among us in the public opinion. But there are at least 3 different fronts to look at for this observation. What has the Day of Memory achieved and become in Italy, in the US, and lastly, what have we done here in New York? In Italy, there has been an attempt to look at the local events related to those days in each city and municipality, an effort to focus on the victims of the Shoah and on the righteous ones that saved some Jews. Less of an effort was made to talk about the perpetrators and the collaborators. In the US, the work had just started. Recently, I read the document about my father prepared by the American soldiers who liberated Buchenwald. Has America celebrated these soldiers when they were still alive? Is their memory ever honored? Unfortunately not. Here in New York, the Day of Memory is relatively new, and what the Italian cultural institution have organized over the years is very important and happens to be a light in the darkness. Others criticize the Day of Memory, that the Day of Memory has become a routine of ceremonies and readings, an annual ritual full of rhetorical statements and events. One Day of Memory followed and preceded by 364 days of oblivion. Some of us, let's be clear, do not need a special day to remember, not just one. I grew up with memories at home of the liberation of the camps, of the night they killed all the gypsies in Auschwitz on August 2nd, 1945, of the consequences of the racial laws approved in 1938. But has the Day of Memory helped somehow to fight ignorance? I believe so. Shed some light on less known events of those days, for sure. The problem, in my opinion, is that we have to translate memory, crucial as it is, into a message for the present, into values that are valid here and now. It is not simple, but it is crucial. Learning about Nazi Germany, extermination camps, or the persecution of Jehovah's Witnesses is not just a look at the past. It should be part of everybody's cultural and historical background and act as an antidote for any kind of discrimination and persecution. It is not just the memory of the victims and their families. It is the history of Europe and Italy, and it is also the story or the history of the country we live in. I am aware that it's getting harder and harder to come up with new programs and new speakers every year. But have we explored all the aspects of what happened and why? Have we looked at all the group of victims? I do not think so. Last year, I spoke about these topics with several classes at Bronx Science, a prestigious public high school in New York. Most of the classes I spoke to were Italian classes, and the focus was a book of memoir by my dad, A5405, the number on his arm, The Courage to Live. The students asked many questions, were interested in details and apparent contradictions in the book. These students still need our events and our ceremonies. They need to know more and think more. In those very multi-ethnic classes, I realized one more time what the Day of Memory is for. The key message, for me, is still very valid. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Stefano. All the questions you raised are certainly very important. I want to say that we have not decided to take a pause of reflection because we think that remembering or presenting this day has come to an end or has come to have less value, but because we see that we're facing a tremendous instrumentalization of this history. We see that has become, on many, many different fronts, a political pawn. In fact, it has been many years that, following the enormous effort of research, of archival work, a whole small industry has been created. Much of it, I would say, is in good faith, for a good purpose, or propelled by people who believe that the history of the extermination camps and the persecution of the Jews and other minorities can, in fact, prevent future genocides and future assaults on the civil society. But can it? Has it? We cannot deny that we live in a society where political violence, public violence, in the very conversations that we are having is paramount. And if we cannot speak with compassion and a sense of peace, a sense of respect for the people that we have in front of us, how can we think that we are speaking about crimes that happened 80 years ago, 90 years ago? How can we believe that we are doing something to honor those victims? At Centro Primo Levi, I just want to say a few things. We opened very informally in 98. By the year 2000, we had just started. We entered the newly created consortium of the Center for Jewish History as a very small affiliate. And we have chosen since the beginning to offer a platform, a showcase to the research that had been done in Italy up to that point that was delayed. It was arrived here, with decades of delay, and to support new research. The work to uncover the persecution of the Jews in Italy, the racial laws, the deportations, the collaborations with the Italian concentration camps, was painful, long, and very difficult. Up to the beginning of the 1980s, there was a close collaboration, a close sense of community among Jewish survivors, resistance fighters, anti-fascist. There was a sense that Italy had been built on, the new Italy, the post-war Italy had been built on the resistance, on the values of anti-fascism. Shortly after the end of the war, the neo-fascist party, the Movimento Sociale Italiano, was created, was allowed to exist, run by former fascists. One of the first episodes that happened, a group of MSA members went to harass women and children in the Jewish area of Rome. Now, if you read the community, the minutes of the community meetings about what to do about it, and are we really in a different Italy? Where are we going? Where are we heading? The journey to the year 2000 was long and painful and difficult, and up to a point, there was a part of the civil society that felt together. I was reading recently, what Primo Levi wrote before his death. He was discouraged. He felt that people were tired, that people were no longer interested. It's true, after the Craxi area, Italy went from being a think tank to being a supermarket. And this would happen very, very fast. It was very shocking. Levi was discouraged and very upset about it, and we read it in his text. I think he perceived that past and that sense of community was slipping off his fingers. So when we started working here, what the immediate past was, there was a major center of studies in Milan, the CEDEC, that had been created in 1955 and had collected documents, had worked to help the very early war crime trials. And it is not until 1988, the 50th anniversary of the racial laws, that archives are really becoming available. And the work that was done, Michele Sarfatti was not only a pioneer in this work, but was the inspiration of so many young historians who went into archives. And this is a very painful work, passing years and years and years. And so at the very beginning, we decided that's what we are going to do. We're going to present their work and support their work. When we started, was a real challenge to go to speak with anybody. For the UN, they threw us out, or the Italian consulate, they look at maybe, and we don't know. At the very, very beginning, it was a very small group. And it was really hard to say, okay, we're going to talk about this, and we are going to talk about the collaborationists, and we're going to talk about the invented righteous, invented for political reasons. You know, the importance of history as a base of democracy is that we can never own the truth. However, we need to believe that the truth is there and that we're pursuing it as much as the other person who may have a different view. And this is fundamental in the relationship of respect that we have with one another. And once that belief in truth is betrayed, that's when you have a facility in creating, expedient histories that make careers, make politics, and so forth. So what we're facing is really this. And my question is, how come that today this history of the persecution not only is ubiquitous, you can't have a cookbook of the Holocaust. You can't have, it's not possible that every single topic can be related to the Holocaust. Something else must be attached to this. And I don't have an answer. When someone say, oh, it's politics of this, I don't have an answer. I'm just saying I cannot, in good conscience, say that we're going to allow this to happen and go along with it. So thank you for listening.
I'm going to speak from the perspective of an American of Italian descent, or an Italian American, and also someone who has 3 degrees in Italian studies. I'm also someone who inadvertently became aware of the Holocaust when I was a kid. My father was in the army in World War II, and he was sent to Dachau in 1945. And inadvertently, because his buddies that were there, they took pictures. And some of the pictures were pictures of them, the soldiers, and some of them were the pictures of what they found. And I remember as 8 or 9-year-old, I just inadvertently came upon these pictures. And I was told they weren't pictures to look at, and they weren't pictures to talk about. Unfortunately, my father died when I was 15 and a half, so I never really got the chance to talk to him about it. But it was a moment that I would occasionally remember as I went along in my studies. It was when I came to Calandra in 2006 and met up with Stefano and Natalia and company that we decided to have an event in connection or in collaboration with the other institutions. And there were 2 that stuck out for me. One, we did something that was collateral to the whole Holocaust, and that was when we did the panel on Graziani. And we had 2 or 3 adults who were child survivors. And then the other one we did that really sticks out was the one we did on Bassani and company. That was a little bit personal to me because I had taken a seminar in the 70s with Giorgio Bassani at the University of California, Berkeley on Pasolini. But what I found over the years was that the notion of the Holocaust is rare among Italian Americans. Italian Americans believe that everybody from Italy is Catholic. And I would always sort of play it down and not say anything until recently. In the last couple of years, there was something written by a self-proclaimed leader of the Italian American community about the 3 essential, his word, essential qualities of being an Italian American were hard work. Well, I think a lot of people work hard. Family. I think a lot of people have loyal to their family. And the third was, and I quote, our centuries-long devotion to our Catholic faith. And I just started thinking, my mother's side comes from a small town in Puglia that has a Waldensian population. And so if you know anything about the Waldensians, you know that they were breakaway Catholics. And of course, over the years, I met friends, I have dear friends in Italian studies who were in fact Jewish. So I thought that it just had to be sort of tackled. And I felt a certain responsibility just because of the community from which I come, that is Italian Americans, many of whom aren't aware of the history of Italy, the 20th century, aren't aware of what fascism really was. I do want to look back then to see and to use it as a backdrop to what's going on today. I think it's imperative that we keep in mind the Shoah, the history of the persecution. It's just incumbent upon us to do it. And we can't stick to this little niche of Italian-American studies or an Italian-American population or the Sunday afternoon dinners or the pizza nonnas. So we within the Italian-American community or the Italian diaspora studies community need to step out, go beyond those boundaries within which we feel so comfortable, even if we do question things. Because there are other issues out there related to the Italian in America, related to the Italian in Argentina, related to the Italian in Canada, and so on and so forth. We are here tonight, and as long as I'm there, we'll be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. And following the tone of this conversation, I'm going to bring my experience as director of the Casa and as a person of these 25 years. And if I have to identify some trends about what the Day of Memory should not be, these are some of the ideas that during these years I have conceived. So first and foremost, to distinguish the legend from the historical truth, and the historical truth based on documents. So the importance of recognizing history. And an historian can never be approximate, but an historian that writes and studies this time has an absolute moral duty not to be approximate and to be generic. Otherwise, you run the risk of creating a building that is going to collapse shortly after. The other thing is the importance and the value of the written world. The written text is the center of our memories. The other thing I've learned is that very often during this celebration, especially in Italy and especially the Italians, and you will stay with me if I recognize a common trait of my compatriots, the temptation of using the Day of Memory to pat ourselves on the back and say, we are not that bad, right? And that comes with the myth of the Italiani brava gente, that if compared to the others, they were not that bad. Andrea just remembered that his father was arrested by Italians, and that many Italians participated in every single aspect of the operation of the arrest, deportation, and so on. So if one thing the Day of Memory should not be, it should not be an occasion to self-absolution of the entire country. The other thing is that we do not learn more if we just focus on one of the groups of victims, so only on the Jews, only of the people that were in a certain part of Europe at that time. And I think in our path of discovery, we really made it a point to explore all the possible ramifications in the victims of the Holocaust. What did it mean to be different from what was the standard proposed by the Nazis and by the fascists? And then we went beyond that. For example, Anthony mentioned the program on Graziani and the Ethiopian War. We had an entire year in which we discovered with cinema, with artists, and with scholars from Ethiopia, the so-called colonial enterprise of Italy, and how interconnected that was with the racist policies against the Italian Jews. And it's not randomly that in order to justify the Italian presence in Africa, they had to come up with racist theories. Why are we there? Yeah, they had the idea that we are bringing civilization, but they were also very aware of the fact that that was laughable. So the idea of racial superiority was the main excuse, was the main reason provided for the invasion of Ethiopia. So these are a few of the things that I learned in these years from my colleagues and from organizing these things. And I believe that it's important to have borders, to have a clear idea of what we can do and what we cannot and should not do in this day. It is too important to be approximate. It is too important to make mistakes. It is too important to make things up. So it's our commitment to truth, to the historical truth, to a serious historical method, to looking also at the sides of things, not only col paraocchi, as we say in Italian, to what happened to others. These are my 5 cents and the few things that I learned, but which I'm very, very convinced. Thank you.
I would like, first of all, to say that I'm proud and deeply touched to have been among the organizers of Giorno della Memoria in New York for about 2 decades now. But mostly, I would like to thank you, the audience, for showing up in often such large numbers year after year for these events. Really, your questions, your comments, your follow-up emails have taught us a lot. So thank you. 1999, I would like to start from there, seems like a long time ago. At that time, I was working as assistant to Andrea Fiano at an Italian financial paper. That year, this is why I'm mentioning it, Peter Novick published a really groundbreaking book called The Holocaust in American Life. I don't have time to summarize it here, but it's really an extraordinary work. And I would like to maybe address some of his starting questions. How did we get where we are concerning the memory of the Holocaust, and whether are we happy with where we are right now with it? As bizarre as it may seem, for 20 years after the end of World War II, the extermination of European Jews was not really a topic, or certainly did not have a name. And all of a sudden, in April 1978, for about 5 consecutive evenings, NBC aired a TV miniseries called The Holocaust. The name caught on. Not only the name, but the idea that the Holocaust is a category outside of history and beyond history. Again, not to repeat what has been said in many of our programs, I'm going to focus on 2 very specific things. I mean, the idea that in 1978, with that mini-series, the category began. And what was possible for artists, thinkers, philosophers, historians before, in my opinion, severely decreased. So I would like to bring to your attention 2 literary works many of you, I'm sure, know, that suggest that, in fact, until that date, 1978, the discourse on the subject enjoyed a much greater freedom, on some level at least. I will refer to 2 novels, one by a Jewish writer, one by a non-Jew. So let me start with a 1965 novel by Thomas Pynchon called The Crying of Lot 49. This is, very briefly, postmodern, satirical, and bitter criticism of American culture of the 60s. And it's written in a very intricate, virtuoso prose that reminiscent a little bit Joyce. Among a bizarre cast of characters that circle through many different plots, with a female protagonist called Edipa Mas, There is her Freudian analyst, Dr. Hilarious. The psychoanalyst is portrayed as the epitome of malpractice. He calls his patients late at night. He prescribes LSD for depression. He tries to cure patients, making silly or grotesque facial expressions. Eventually, Dr. Hilarious has a paranoid breakdown. He locks himself in his office with a gun, and he imagines that Israeli soldiers are out to get him. Eventually, he confesses his past as a Nazi doctor, experimenting with patients in concentration camps, being an assistant to Dr. Mengele. It seems to me that Pynchon uses this hyperbolic caricature to hint at the dark history that haunts American consumerist society and its shadows. Hilarious, egregious malpractice is Pynchon's way to criticize science potential to be used for evil. And this is very much what Gunther Anders, what Primo Levi speak about. But here he's doing it in a novel, in a satirical novel, and I think it has a very different kind of impact, one that could not be used today. The second example is a novel by Philip Roth, The Ghost Rider, from 1979. It actually came out only 4 months after the TV series I was talking about. The whole novel unfolds one evening, in the course of an evening, when Zuckerman, who is at his first appearance as Roth's alter ego, visit his idol, a reclusive writer, Mr. Lonoff, in his country home. There, Zuckerman is intrigued by a mysterious European young woman called Amy Billette, whom he suspects is Anne Frank, who has survived the Holocaust and is alive and well. In 1979, as you know, Anne Frank was already among the most celebrated, untouchable, maybe the right word, something like sacrosanct, is that word exists in English, myth for American Jews. Roth ruthlessly takes apart this martyrological image of a girl and turns Anne Frank into an object of sexual desire. Beyond taking the liberty of this imagination, I believe that Roth wants to suggest a shift that was happening right then and that he was pointing to in the cultural memory of the Shoah in America. There are two extraordinary moments in the novels that I want to recall. One is Anne Frank, again, alive and well, goes to a Broadway play. The play is based on the diary of Anne Frank. She's horrified, but puts up with seeing her name on the marquees, reading the program notes. But she really breaks down when she sees the public, particularly fancy Park Avenue ladies in furs, shedding tears and then expressing words of pity for the portrayal of her as a young girl in the play. The second moment is when Zuckerman imagines how falling in love with this paradigmatic victim of Nazi persecution would transform his life. And he imagines taking her home to her parents as his new girlfriend. And again, there's a very telling moment where he imagined his father asking once again, but is she Jewish? Thank you.
I have a last closing note. Sorry, this has been 25 years of this work. And I like to pay homage to our board member, dear friend, Stella Levi, who is here. And I want to tell a short story about Stella. So a few years ago, Stella calls in one of these, when we are discussing, what are we going to do with Giorno della Memoria. I should back up, probably everybody knows. Stella was born on the island of Rhodes, and she was among the 2,000 deportees from the island who were taken to Auschwitz under Italian watch by the Germans. And she survived with her sister. She went back to Italy, and then she came here. And she has been a presence of life and love and support not only for us, but for many, many other people. And I want to thank her. We wouldn't be here without her. One day, a few years ago, she calls me up. She said, Natalia, you know, I think this thing of a Holocaust, first of all, I don't like the word, and this is too much. I think it's not healthy. I think all these people, you know, you see these young people listening, hearing about the Holocaust and feeling like they are themselves victims or being confused. I don't think it's good. I think we have a great thing in our tradition is the Pesach Haggadah. We made this story, and this story makes us grow. And so I want to make a Haggadah of the Holocaust. So I call Alessandro and Peter Statsny, who is a psychiatrist and filmmaker who has been a very, very dear presence for us for many years. And we start working with Stella, you know, ideas, bringing text. After 3 years of weekly meetings, Stella announces, you know what, none of you is a native speaker. We're never going to do something in good English, and so we're not going to do it, period. So of course we were disappointed, but we accepted the decision of the boss, and it ended there. Each one of us has a big pack of papers. Now I want to say something. Recently, when we were talking at the beginning of the year, we were talking about this. It was, you know, something. It hit me that Stella had given us a treasure, because the Haggadah is not really about that history, we read the story. But what is most amazing about the Haggadah points to two groups of people. The listeners, the sons, we're all different. Someone knows, someone doesn't know, someone is wise. And the other is the Chachamim, the rabbis. You know, one thinks this way, one thinks the other way, and the whole Haggadah is about method in how we think, how we remember. This question about who is listening. And so as we go forward, I feel very much that this is going to be our guiding question. Who is listening? Thank you.
English, perhaps American English, has a wonderful capacity for the creation of catchphrases that are both banal and profound. I would just like to mention, I mean, this might help a little bit explain who we are, some of these stereotypes, some of these slogans and phrases. For instance, it is a curious thing that all of us are Italian, some of us are Italian and Jewish, and we're doing this in New York. But who are we really? And so, speaking for myself, again, I am Italian and Jewish. So according to these stereotypes, the kind of the imperative for Jews is never forget. But if you look at the equivalent stereotype for Italian Americans, think of the Sopranos, you get forget about it. So the real question is, how can you remember and forget at the same time? And I think it's very important to understand that the process of remembering and the process of forgetting need to go hand in hand. You know, if you think of, again, literature, Borges has this wonderful stories about Munes el Memorioso, which is a person, a character who remembers everything that ever happened, and thus he's a total idiot. He doesn't know what to do with all this knowledge. So there's a point in which all this knowledge has to be balanced by our capacity to forgetting. And maybe this can suggest some ideas to all of you.
Have you done or contemplated doing much with the equivalent French, Spanish, German, British communities in New York as part of your Giorno della Memoria celebrations over the years?
We do always invite, colleagues. We really try to not to delimit our work as Italians or to Italy. A lot of the work we have done, in fact, I would say the largest project of Centro Primo Levi that went on for 15 years is about frontiers. It is about what does frontiers mean and how they work. And how do they reflect on individuals, on populations, and what they mean for the power that be. So, and also in terms of our research, that is something that it doesn't always translate into programs. The research that we support and that is done by, by groups of historians in various countries. Yes, it is very important. We always try, in fact, to look more at the transitions and what's dynamic in historical processes, rather than interpret it within national borders. Because national borders are a very recent thing, and it is it is somewhat fictitious to look at history that way.
Just a little footnote to what Natalia said. For the reading of the names, I know that the Consulate General of Italy, that is the sponsoring organization, and that's actually where the reading of the names takes place. They always invite the Consul Generals at least of the other European countries. Yes. And in the past, they participated, varying from year to year, but there is always an attempt to make it at least a European event.
It is quite peculiar. I will describe the fact without necessarily giving an answer. The reading of the names of the Italian deportees, Italian from Italy and from so back then Italian occupied territories. Yes, the consulate is inviting the other consuls of European and non-European countries, some diplomats from the UN. And I often have the feeling, it's my personal opinion, that they are doing a favor. They show up because they've been invited. And I always try to guess whose consul is what. You can hear sometimes the accent, the way they read these names. And it's a very good and open question. Why, with the exception of very few, the Greeks do stuff, but I don't know that the other countries do it. Now, it might be because the Italians came to terms with what happened in Italy maybe later than others. I don't know, it's a possibility. But I often feel when describing the Day of Memory and describing what takes place, that people think of it as an Italian thing, which is really odd. So that's one. The other thing I wanted to say, in my keynote, I try to be tiptoe between many different political current obstacles. I'm not a neutral person, anything but. So the truth is there would be a lot of other things to say. But one thing in terms of perspective, when you were talking about the Agada, like an Agada of the Holocaust, it brought to mind something that maybe gives a sense of time to everybody. When I was growing up, and so I'm talking about at least 60 years ago, we were a family who just moved from Florence to Milan. We didn't know many people, and of course my father was the survivors. There were not that many survivors. And we used to have the Seder at the house of the local rabbi, one of the rabbis, who then became chief rabbi, principal of the school, all different things. A lovely man. And I remember that every year, and I probably was in elementary school, every year there was a discussion because my father was saying, well, we're saying all this stuff. We're reading all these beautiful things. We need to say something about what happened in the camps. And there was a mini struggle. And a mini struggle, and I'm talking about the most sympathetic family in the world. Usually I would fall asleep, and I remember falling asleep out of this whole long evening. But I remember this mini struggle that ended up with a little bit of a mention, of a prayer, of a blessing. So I think that, yes, all the stuff about civil society, where we are now, there's a lot of very negative things going on and a lot of challenges, even to the Day of Memory. But we went a long way. If in the 60s we had to even bring up the issue of maybe we remember the exodus from Egypt, maybe it's time to mention what happened 20, 30, whatever years before. So just to put it in a historical perspective.
Of course, we continue to do it, and we do it with embracing fully what we're doing, except that we're just questioning what's going on. but we're not going to stop. I want to say something else about borders that I think is interesting in terms of when we read this nearly 10,000 names, you're not reading a national sample. You're not seeing borders. You're seeing passages, journeys. You see people who went from North Africa to the Balkans, from the Balkans to Italy, from Yugoslavia to France. You see people who move. I think this is very important when we read that history.
Well, thank you for mentioning the Seder and this whole concept of doing something as opposed to just remembering, like the praxis of memory is what I'm interested in, and how to think about ritualizing or repeating. Now, the Giorno della Memoria reading of the names is certainly an example of that kind of ritualization. But I think one could go beyond that. I think we were trying to go beyond that with the Seder, because the memories are recent. There are witnesses. What we actually tried to do was to use writings that were coeval, meaning contemporary to the Shoah, which I think was a very particular kind of approach. Now, one of the problems with creating a ritual is, well, how do you create a ritual without God? So that can become a question also, how to engage with that whole trajectory in the future.
Yes.
Yes. Stefano, thank you. And thank you for this presentation. I have to say, though, that there's, it seems like there's a question that's not being asked here or discussed here at all yet. And that is, I would imagine that this year is, not to be glib, is different from all others. We are in a moment where the president of the country is denouncing people as garbage. The Mexicans are rapists, the Venezuelans are drug dealers. We are watching it happen as it happened in 1938. What is the memory is all wonderful. What do we do about it? What do we say right now? How do we speak? There are many, many people who are asking this question right now. How do we respond to this moment, knowing this history as we all do?
That's the question, and a good rabbi would tell you that you never answer a question with an answer, you answer with another question. And that's why we are here tonight. We are trying to, that's exactly the point. And we are trying to also to move away from facile answers to your question, right? Because there is no easy answer. It's a central issue. And an historian, pure breed historian like you, brought it up, and it's very important.
At the cost of sounding silly, let's ask ourselves if there were people speaking in every school and bringing out this topic in every school, and every high school student in this country was listening to this stuff for an hour and 2 hours. I think it would make a difference. Yeah. When I was at Bronx Science, they were very involved. I spent a full day, 4 classes. They were marveling at the idea that somebody's there whose father was in the camps. Where are you from? What is exactly? Was that just in Italy? And they were very smart kids. I wish I could be there every day. If we want to think about solutions, there are also very small solutions and things that we do. I tell you, over the years, listening at people passing by Park Avenue and looking at these strange guys standing up and reading names. And this year was even more eerie because the names were sounding on Park Avenue and there was nobody there because we were inside the building. Those are the little things that make a difference.
It's more of a comment. Talking about the lack of awareness in education, there is one bright spot. The Post Museum on 23rd Street and 6th Avenue has a fabulous exhibit on Mussolini, fascism, art as propaganda. And when I visited, the people around were dumbstruck, not that they didn't know the information, but how it paralleled what we're going through currently in this country. Exactly. So, I mean, that's a bright spot. And I don't know if the Postal Museum has publicized it, but if anyone wants it, it is excellent.
I have an alternative itinerary for those who cannot see the exhibit there. We did an exhibit here at the Casa, and we opened it like 2 days before the lockdown, so nobody actually saw it. And the name was Propaganda, and it was largely archive material coming from the same archive that is Fondazione Cirulli in Bologna. So I wouldn't say all of the posters there now were here, but most of them were. And for that occasion, we prepared the first ever immersive 360 virtual reality visit to an exhibit. And Nicola Lucchi is the narrating voice, and you see him back there. So if you look at in the website of Casa Italiana and our YouTube channel, Casa Italiana zerilli-marimò Propaganda, and you can actually take a tour of that exhibit with those posters.
Concept was a little different, but some of the images are the same and powerful for all the wrong reasons, of course. If I may add a thing here again, it's a comment more than a question, and for various reasons in recent days I was rereading parts of the book The Ethics of Memory of Avishai Margalit, and I was thinking that what we have done, for better or worse, is we have created, in a sense, in this space of New York City, a community of memory. There is this idea that he advances in the book that memory is a labor, and it's a labor that is distributed among various parties. There are the archives, there are the historians, there are the people that popularize some of the more difficult concepts, there are the people that receive this knowledge. All of these have a stake in making this labor of memory function, but at the core of that process, there is precisely the idea of the ethics of it, that we cannot divorce what we do, each in our area, from some ethical points that should remain staple. And I think that there is always a risk that as the years pass and as the politics change and the current events and the ways in which we may wish to rethink or reread the past in the light of the present, which is inevitable and important, but yeah, making sure we have a compass in what we do.
And if I may add, this is a little more difficult, always to your question. The Holocaust, and not the history of the extermination, not the history of the camps, but the Holocaust, which has become, as I said, a package. And also, there are some very serious historians, but there is also a very large movement of institutions and packages that are distributed in schools in a way that I would say is pretty indiscriminate and never ask the question of who is listening, who are these children who are listening. And whereas I agree with Andrea that it is important to have this experience and to hear this history, it is also true that a lot of these mandatory curricula are, first of all, extremely poorly conceived. They're biased. They're often patronizing of the students. And I'm not sure that they achieve a lot more than creating conflict and a certain amount of resentment for Jews in the present. And we're up against this.
And there are people who are very well organized and well financed who want to remove books like Bautz and Anne Frank from schools. And there are teachers who are, one, afraid to say something, and also being told by administrators not to teach that because they're being told by Washington not to teach that. And it goes beyond the Holocaust, obviously, to America's Holocaust. Slavery is being erased once again from the curriculum in our schools. So this is, it's a much bigger problem.
Well, it's two very different. The Holocaust is often used to avoid teaching slavery, and this is a very big problem. The Holocaust is mandatory. Slavery is not in 23 states.
I think I agree with you, but I also think that we've lost the sites of local conversation. Local newspapers have been closed, so you no longer have the local newspaper. You no longer have the local voices that sometimes talk against one another. I'm old enough to remember on TV, David Susskind, Dick Cavett. There were talk shows, and people would scream and yell at whatever. They would take on topics that were really, and Bill Buckley, whatever. We don't have that anymore. We had it sort of at the beginning of the 90s with a little bit with Crossfire on CNN, but it's disappeared. And you look at these talk shows now, and nobody challenges anyone.
The media world has changed completely, and what used to be a talk show is almost meaningless now in a time of podcasts and TikTok. So that's another entire problem. I think it still comes back to the question of what do we do now in this moment? And I certainly have no answers. I'm looking for answers.
It's good not to have answers.
No, but it's the most alarming moment in our lifetimes. I mean, seriously, I say that without reservation as somebody who's watched history for a very long time. Having lived through 1968 as a kid, it was bad, but it was not what we have right now.
The vocabulary has changed too, because in the 1960s we spoke about acceptance. Now we speak about tolerance, and who wants to be tolerated? I want to be accepted. And that alone has its impact.
I think we all agree that this is a very particular and dire moment in our lives and on this subject and many others. And I think that what's different about this panel from many of our programs that we've done is that we're not trying to present something, but we are beginning a new level of reflection on this. And all of you can be very helpful to us. And we hope that this is not an evening on its own, but really the beginning of discussion among themselves and with you. I know it's hard on the spot to come up with many new topics, but we would like to continue during this year without waiting for the next day of memory, of addressing all of the issues that you're raising and that we feel are very important.
There is no shortage of topics. There is plenty of new research. There are many things, and there is there are list of really interesting and important research. But the connection of thinking about the past in relation to the urgency of the present is what paused us. Thank you.
Thank you all again very much, and stay tuned for the other upcoming parts of these projects. Thank you.